Hello and welcome to Serving Transgender Patrons, a Librarian's Guide. My name is Margot Moore, and this is.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Lopez.
Um, we both use they, them pronouns. So this presentation was originally given at KLA 2020, but there were some technical difficulties. And so we are now in December re-recording everything. So you may have seen a slightly different version of this if this is something that you are watching after the fact, and you may have seen our original presentation. This is version 2, Electric Boogaloo. Here we go. So like I said before, my name is Margot Moore. I am a youth services assistant at the Lawrence Public Library. I enjoy me some Dungeons and Dragons. I recently just graduated from Emporia State with my MLS, so that's very exciting. And then I will defer to my
Uh,
lovely co-host.
Hi, thank you. I'm Kimberly. My pronouns are they, them, as Margaret said before. I work in the Reader Services Department at Lawrence Public Library, and I am a big fan of cozy sweaters, and more often than not, you will probably find me talking about Harry Styles. I am still dreaming about the cover of Vogue. Um, we're big fans of gender nonconformity in this house, so thumbs up, two thumbs up. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start talking a little bit about names and pronouns. First of all, I want to talk about a term called dead name. And dead naming is the commonly used term for the name that a trans person no longer uses. More often than not, it is the name that's assigned to them at birth. And some people may choose to keep their name, and others might change it, or they might go through a process of trying different names on for size and seeing what suits them best. Dead naming is the act of using a person's dead name after they've picked a different name. And now this can be emotionally triggering and potentially a traumatizing experience for the trans person. So it's really important that you keep in mind their name, the one that they have chosen for themselves, and just keep that in mind and remain respectful, and try not to use the name that they no longer use. And something that you can really easily do to validate trans patrons is just by using their desired names and their pronouns. Pronouns, we've shared ours. So one good thing that you can do is just normalize sharing pronouns. So when you're introducing yourself in a large group or anything like that, you can say, "Hi, my name is, and my pronouns are they, them, or she, her." That's a really good way to just be a good ally, because gender euphoria is for everyone.
And some sort of quick instances where this might apply, I thought I would add this. So, for example, if a patron says a certain name and then for some reason, accounts probably reason, they hand you an ID and the name on the ID does not match the name they gave you, it does not mean that, like, do not use the name on their ID. Call people what they tell you to call them. So that's just sort of a general, like, place where it might be applicable.
Mhm.
Um,
And it's also important to keep in mind, Margot, I think you mentioned this when we did the first presentation. Be mindful of kiddos and parents, because not all kids are out in their home, and they might not have a sympathetic home in regards to their names and their pronouns. So just that's something that Margaret can probably talk about a little bit better than me. But that's something to also keep in mind.
Yes. So with that, keep in mind, a lot of teens particularly use the library as, at least pre-COVID-19, would use the library as a home away from home, spend most of their time there if they don't feel comfortable at home. So this is their place where you can make them feel like they matter. You can make them feel like they are seen in their gender identity. If their parent comes to the library and refers to them by their dead name and their pronouns they no longer use, do not use those pronouns, but also do not out this child. Um, we all work with words. We're librarians. Get creative. Just make a sentence that is so devoid of pronouns that, like, you will be astounded how much you can skirt around things. You can always just say, "Oh yes, your kiddo is over there," or something of that nature. But just be very careful. You can even ask the kid, like, "Hey, If your parent comes, what do you want me to call you? How do we want to go like through or around this? Because for a lot of teens, a library is a safe place for them. I grew up as a library kid. That was my like safe space. And so making sure that we create and keep that kind of atmosphere for kiddos today is really, really important to me. So I'm going to switch to our next slide. We're going to talk about neopronouns. So neopronouns are any pronoun aside from he, she, and they. So pronouns that are not sort of originally in the English language. And these might be a little bit harder to learn, but that does not mean they are any less important. Um, Another quick thing before I move on, some people may use multiple pronouns. So what this means is somebody might use, a good example since we last did our presentation is Elliot Page, who's come out
Mhm.
as trans, and he uses he and they pronouns. Some people prefer one over the other, but don't mind the two. So they'll say, like, oh, I use he, they, or she, they, or uh, they, and another like neopronoun.
Mhm.
Just ask the person, like, do you want me to mix things up more? Do you want one to be used more frequently than another? Um, if you are having trouble figuring out the conjugation, either ask that person, or there are, like this chart, there are a ton of charts online. It's also especially important that we included this chart because one of the authors that we've included and we're going to talk about later on uses neopronouns. So
Mhm.
just because you are unfamiliar with a word does not make it any less of a word. Our brains have a harder time learning different pronouns because in linguistics it's a closed class, but that doesn't mean you can't add to it. It just means it might be harder to learn, but that makes it all the more important that we are very mindful that this is important to people. We need to work hard to make sure we get this right, to make sure people feel comfortable in the library.
Mhm. And it's also just important to give the correct pronouns for authors as well. That way, you aren't accidentally misgendering them when you're recommending a book, or you're not accidentally misgendering them if they come visit your libraries, because sometimes that can happen, and that's an avoidable snafu if you just look into their pronouns. And most authors nowadays, especially if they are trans,
Mhm,
they share their pronouns. It's becoming wildly more of a thing, which is which
mhm.
is good.
But yeah, one of the authors on our list uses am heirs pronouns, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Okay, I'm going to continue to motor mouth at y'all. Restroom access. This is something that I am extremely passionate about. Did a whole big research project on it in undergrad. So, restroom access can and will define how trans patrons will interact with your library as a space. They may love the library, they may love talking to the librarians, they may love your programming, but if there is nowhere they feel safe using the restroom, they may not come at all. You may never see people who would love to use the library as a resource, as a study spot, because there is nowhere to pee. So if you do happen to have like a family restroom or an all gender restroom, or even just if you don't, if somebody asks you for um, where a restroom is, start practicing telling them where every restroom is. That way you don't sort of assume based on how people look where they may feel more comfortable using the restroom. So for example, if somebody comes up and you doesn't matter if they're cis, if they're trans, just say we have a women's restroom here, we have a men's restroom here, we have a family restroom here, but people who are not families are obviously welcome to use it. So just get in the habit of introducing where everything is. That way, if you don't misidentify someone, you don't say oh, the women's restroom's over there. They're not a woman and not comfortable with that. That avoids that entirely. And it's also just useful information to have. If you somehow are lucky enough to get a new space or build a new space in your library, all gender restrooms that are not just a family restroom or just in a children's area are really important. Um, they can also provide people who, because they're usually single stall um, or single, just one room kind of situation, they're also better for people with disabilities or people who have caretakers because there's a lot more space. So We love accessible bathrooms. We love all gender bathrooms. Continue Consider signage or a policy that affirms the right of your patrons to use the restroom. So maybe having the rules somewhere like we affirm the right for patrons to use the restroom that matches their gender identity and not how we perceive them, just so no one can sort of bring that back on you. It's good to have it in policy. Um, and when considering signage, at all possible, please avoid like you see them on the internet all the time where it's like a unicorn and a mermaid. And it's just like, I don't care, just wash your hands. Like that's please don't do that. That's really infantilizing and flippant and weird. Just put like all gender restroom or just restroom. Like it's picture of a toilet. It's not particularly difficult. It's just a weird pet peeve of mine when people are like, I don't care, just wash your hands. Like, you better just be doing that anyway. Okay, continuing on, like lack of safe restroom access can be dangerous. It can be physically dangerous, it can be emotionally dangerous, it can be like bad for your mental health. Some people will, when they're out in public, refrain from drinking water because they are too scared to use a restroom where they might be assaulted or harassed. Some people may just not use the restroom at all, even if they need to, which can lead to kidney infections. It can lead to a UTI. It's like all sorts of nasty, bad health things come from just not being able to pee when you need to. And at least a third of trans people, based on a 2017 study, have experienced bullying or violence in restrooms. Like, I know several people who have gone through that, and it's awful and horrifying. And we have to think about intersectionality in this, where the people who are the most at risk are not going to be people like me. They are usually trans women of color who face a lot more violence and a lot more just scary, awful stuff that we may never have to face. So keep that in mind too when you're trying to provide a safe place where things are a lot more complicated for some trans folks than for others, or might be significantly more unsafe. That is my long bathroom spiel to end in slightly lighter note. Everybody poops. Everybody deserves safety and dignity when using the restroom. And I know we don't like to talk about bathrooms that much in society unless you're me because I'm a goblin person. I'm just here to like be a little creature and be like, well, this research actually says, but just be considerate, be kind. Everybody poops. Now on to Kim.
All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can be a good ally to trans patrons as well as trans, employees at your library or just trans folks in general. So one good thing you can do that's pretty easy is just give trans folks the space to express themselves. And not every trans experience is the same experience. So keep that in mind. People express themselves in different ways, they dress in different ways, their pronouns might not align with what society thinks of as feminine or masculine, and that's okay. Just let them be themselves. They're just living their life, and the best thing that you can do as someone who works in a library is give them the space within the library to be themselves and just live the life that they are most comfortable leading. We've talked about this a little bit already, but sharing your pronouns, that's a really, really good place to start. Don't end there though. I know it's really easy to just put your pronouns in maybe your email signature or maybe on a button at work. Those are really good things you can do, but don't stop there. You should continue to be an ally. So not only share your pronouns if you can, but also validate other people's pronouns. So if you know of someone who is getting misgendered while you are in the library, and you know that it is safe for you to assert their pronouns, do do so. It's something that's can be very emotionally wearing on people who are trans to constantly be misgendered. And so if they know that they have an ally who is willing to kind of go to bat for them and say, well, actually their pronouns are they, them, that's a really, really positive way that you can show that the person is safe while they are around you and they're around the library. One other thing that you can do, um, to be a good ally is to be very conscious of the types of books and authors you are inadvertently promoting based off of the books that you recommend to people. And so, with that in mind, we're going to talk a little bit about the author who must not be named. J.K. Rowling is known for a very famous book of children's books, maybe children's series, maybe you've heard of them. But she has, within the past, shown some transphobic behavior, and within the past year, has kind of doubled down on her opinions towards the trans community. And this is pretty harmful for everyone involved. So, with that in mind, it can often be painful for trans patrons or even trans staff to talk about Harry Potter or be recommended Harry Potter books. And so you should keep that in mind of authors who have shown to be problematic and who aren't necessarily safe for folks to read. And instead, you should recommend other authors and other series of authors that you know aren't problematic or who are trans, which is even better. And then you should also consider programming alternatives. So instead of Harry Potter book night, maybe you do
Percy
um,
Jackson.
Percy Jackson. Rick Riordan is a really good ally. He's very mindful of the trans community and other marginalized communities. So be sure to highlight the authors and books that you know are safe and that are good for folks to read. And then at the bottom of the slide, Margot has helpfully included a few resources. So if you want a little bit more information in regards to the whole J.K. Rowling situation, there are a few YouTube videos as well as it looks like an article that you can check out down below. And we both highly recommend that maybe you look more into this just because these books are prolific and for a very long time were, and some are still beloved by many people, but it's a very sensitive topic within the trans community. And that's something, if you want to be a good ally, that you can definitely can and should be mindful of.
And to include a thing, if somebody just says, "Hey, I don't want to talk about Harry Potter," don't double down. Something I've seen from a lot of people, and it's well intentioned, but it's not well received, is when they're like, "But I can still like it." We're not telling you what you can and can't like. We're just saying that we don't like. At least me personally, like I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear about it. I'm kind of sick of the whole thing. Um, so don't take things too personally if a trans person or just anyone's like, I let's not like what you want to like, how you want to like it. But if somebody expresses their discomfort, it's not about you, it's about the content of the thing or the sort of the culture around the thing that makes them uncomfortable, not necessarily you liking the thing.
Yeah, that's a good thing to point out. Um, Also conveniently, we have included 8 books that are really good Harry Potter read-alikes that we highly encourage you recommend instead. 2 in particular that I absolutely adore on this list, The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune was I think my favorite book of 2020 so far. There are a couple other books that are pretty wonderful that I've read, but that one is superb. Another all-time favorite is Carry On by Rainbow Rowell, which is kind of the queer answer to Harry Potter. Rainbow Rowell also, fun fact, once retweeted a blog post that I had written about her series, and an incorrect pronoun was used, and she retweeted the blog post again with the correct pronoun. So we know she is respectful of pronouns. So if Rainbow Rowell can do it, you can do it too.
Can't. And a couple of my favorites is I adore the Magnus Chase series. Like I read Percy Jackson when I was younger. I really liked them. I think the Magnus Chase series is my absolute favorite though. There is a trans character in the second book and the third book. And I think that how this character is handled is very respectful and well researched. At one point for school, I was doing a website on just like trans resources for parents for an assignment, and I would look at the Goodreads reviews for those books, and Rick Riordan would always be like, "This is a great book." So like, and I was like, "How are we reading all the same trans books, Rick?" But he's somebody who does his research and is very respectful. Sarah Gailey Magic for Liars by Sarah Gailey is another favorite of mine. It takes place at a magic school, and Sarah Gailey is non-binary. They write good stuff. So
Yeah.
that one's a favorite
Um,
of mine.
Yeah, and then Akata Witch is a really, really, really good one, especially if you want to diversify your reading lists. Nydia Okorafor is a powerhouse within sci-fi and fantasy. She has really made a name for herself, and she is absolutely lovely. Kaysen Calendar, who wrote Queen of the Conquered, that's a really good author to check out, as well as River Solomon. And then we have Shannon. I always
Shannon.
Shannon. Thank you. I
Yeah,
always
I got
mispronounce
you.
her name. But that is also a really wonderful series. So there are 8 books right here, and there are many, 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 many more out there for folks to check out and read and love just as much, if not more, than a problematic author's books.
And some of these are adult books, some of these are kids, some of these are teen. Every Heart a Doorway is one that, even though it's technically like adult fantasy, could very easily be recommended to a teen.
Mhm.
Um,
All
alrighty.
right. I'm going to talk a little bit about readers' advisory tips. So, kind of what you should keep in mind when recommending books to folks. When you're in doubt, focus on own voices. And what do I mean by that? An own voices book is one where the main character of the book shares a similar identity, or they're from the same marginalized group as the author. And this allows for the author to provide maybe more authentic or nuanced experience of that character's experience than someone who does not share that identity. And so that's something to really keep in mind to promote own voices, as well as just really emphasize own voices in the kind of books that you recommend, just because sometimes, even if authors have the best intent when writing a character in one of their books, they might accidentally get some experiences wrong, or they might accidentally stereotype a character. And so, a really good way to avoid that is to focus on own voices. And so, pretty much, you should ask yourself, if you're recommending a book about a trans experience, is the author trans? If so, great. Start there and keep moving forward. And so, what you want to avoid then when you are recommending books, especially to trans patrons, and if they're about the trans experiences, be mindful of trauma. Some books, just based off of kind of what's been popular within the publishing industry, can be very traumatic, or they only focus on negative events within people's lives. And so, just definitely keep that in mind, and make sure that you provide content warnings if necessary. And just don't only recommend sad books, because everyone is, deserves a joyful, fun, happy book as well. And then also go beyond the trapped in the wrong body narrative, because that is one experience, and that experience is very valid, but that is not every single experience. I think within media, especially, there is a kind of a stereotyped or very typical or expected experience within the trans community. And again, that is a very valid experience, but that is not everyone's experience. So that is something to keep in mind, that trans experiences are not a monolith. Transness is not a one size fits all experience. Everyone is different. Every individual has a different experience. So just make sure that you not only diversify the type of books that you are recommending, but also the breadth of stories that you are sharing with others. Um, with that in mind, diversity of lived experiences. Okay, so not all trans people stick to the gender binary. For instance, Margot and I are both non-binary. So everyone again is different. So be sure to look for gender non-conforming authors in general. Margot already mentioned one before, Sarah Gailey. They are non-binary. There are a bunch of other authors that we have listed within the this presentation already. So just keep in mind that you're not recommending the same type of experience over and over again, because that itself can become a little bit problematic if you're only sticking to maybe like white trans experience when there are many, many, many other experiences out there. So yeah, be sure to represent non-white trans people. And it is also important now more than ever, especially this year, that we as librarians should be recommending books written by Black authors. We have already included several um, on this in this presentation, and we will include several more, but that's something that you should always keep in mind. Always promote Black authors if you have them within your system. And if you're able to, definitely research and look out for even more authors that you can include in your catalog. And if you're able, buy them. Because, you know, as librarians, we're the ones promoting these books and we're the ones putting them in the hands of patrons. And that in itself is pretty powerful.
Alrighty, so we're going to start off with some kids' book recommendations. Let me see if I can move this so that people can see stuff a bit better. So our number one tip for kids' book recommendations is to try to avoid books that use metaphor in order to convey queerness or transness. For example, there are books that I used to recommend, I don't anymore, where it's like, oh, this is about a crayon who feels like a blue crayon, but is really a red crayon. Like, that's not going to convey transness. Kids are going to read that and be like, it's about crayons. Um, have and there are now there are more picture books out now with trans kids in them. So we don't have any excuses anymore to be like only recommending one kind of sort of cloaked in metaphor trans narrative. Um, there's When Aiden Became a Brother, that won I think it won a Stonewall Award this year. That is one of my favorites. Uh, a bunch of, I think there's Phoenix Goes to School or Phoenix's First Day at School. There's a bunch of really, really great books out there that don't rely on transness as metaphor because kids aren't, it's going to fly over their heads. They're not going to make the connection. Okay, there we go. So When Aiden Became a Brother by Kyle Lukoff. Kyle Lukoff is a trans man. He writes a bunch of fantastic books. He's got another one out that has a trans character in it, but this is just about a little boy named Aiden who is going to become a big brother. I can't read this book without crying, so I can never do it at story time because I'm an older sibling. Like, I get anything sibling related, I'm just like, so yeah, that one's very sweet. It's very wholesome. It's just like, it's a hug, but a book. It Feels Good to Be Yourself by Teresa Thorne is another great resource. Teresa Thorne is not trans, but the illustrator is. And it's a nonfiction book that goes over different types and ways to identify for kids in a way that's really easy for them to explain and in a way that shows just a wide array of kids that experience gender in different ways. So, and I really like the illustrations. They're just nice. They're lovely.
Okay, I'm going to talk about two more books that are more for middle grade age range, so a little bit older readers. Zenobia July by Lisa Bunker is a really good one. This is about a girl who is moving to a new school to go live with her aunts. And for the first time in her life, she's able to identify the way that she is without, you know, fear of anything. And she is a little bit of a like hacker. She's really good with computers. And so when someone shares some pretty hurtful memes at her school, she is on the case to figure out who done it. So not only is it a nice coming of age tale, but it's also, there's a little bit of a mystery in there. And then the next one is Pet by Okweke Emezi. Um, and this one is about another little girl. Her name is Jam, and she lives in a world where monsters do not exist. So you can imagine her surprise when a monster crawls out of her mother's painting one day. And so this one talks about racial identity and some other maybe more serious topics, but covered in a way that is still for children and still approachable and not too overwhelming. This author also writes books for adults as well. So they are definitely have a breadth of writing experience. And it's a really good one to start with for younger kiddos.
Alrighty. So YA recommendations. Give kids hope. Give trans kids hope. Let them see themselves in an adventure. Because a lot of the time, a lot of the narratives we as queer and trans people get are coming out stories. There are very seldom like, oh, I'm a superhero and being trans is part of my identity, but the story is really about fighting the bad guy, or I'm a majestic elf guy and I'm going to go on a quest or something like that. You don't get a lot of that. It's a lot of like, oh, people don't know I'm trans. And then by the end, it's like, people know I'm trans. And it's not a bad thing to have in books. It's an important story, an important narrative to have, but expand on that because kids want to see themselves in multiple different ways. So here are two of my very favorite trans YA books. The first is Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar, which goes into the sort of diversity of lived trans experiences. Felix is Black, and he has a hard time feeling like he's either Black enough or trans enough, or feels like he is too part of one identity to fully be the other. And that kind of sort of eats at him. The other thing about Felix Ever After is if you have any parents who are looking for books about understanding their trans kid, this is absolutely the one. So one of my favorite things about Felix Ever After is that he lives with his father, who is supportive of his transition, helped him get top surgery, helped him get on hormones, helped him get his name changed, but has the hardest time calling him his name. And so he's supportive in some ways, but in others he's really falling short, and it's hurting Felix. And it's just Felix has a hard time sort of reconciling these two parts of his father together. And I think that's a more realistic parent trans kid experience than what I've seen in a lot of other books. So this one, if you have any parents who want to understand their kiddos a bit better, Felix Ever After is fantastic. A little bit like Zenobia July, Felix Ever After is about Felix, who goes to this fancy art school, and one day when he is going to school over the summer, somebody has taken old photos of him pre-transition, blown them up really big, and then put them all over the entryway of the school. And he has to find out who has done this. So it's kind of got a mystery. It's got some like exploring identity, because he's like, I know I'm not a woman, like I know I'm not a girl, but I don't know if I'm fully a man. How do I identify myself? It's chef's kiss, just wonderful. Please read this book. Please recommend this book. One of my all-time like favorite YA books. My other favorite, and this one you might want to give some content warnings on because it is a harder, more intense book, but the whole story as a whole is more intense, is Dreadnought by April Daniels. So Dreadnought is about a girl named Danielle who um, is trans, but she's not out. And then one day, the superhero Dreadnought falls from the sky, gives her his powers, and she all of a sudden looks like she's always thought she should look. And so suddenly she goes from being a closeted trans girl to, oh, I am very obviously a girl to people and I have superpowers. And now I am the most powerful, like sort of the Superman, like that kind of level of superhero in this world. How do I interact with other superheroes? The parent relationship in that one is distressing. So if you have a kiddo that might be more sensitive to that, this is a thing to give them a heads up on. It can be pretty triggering, but it's also just a more intense story in general where a lot of stuff happens to the characters. It's got a lot of meat to it. But an excellent book, one of my other favorites. Sorry, I rambled too long.
Okay, another recommendation is Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. This one follows a young trans guy whose family has magic. And so he is not super supported by his family for being trans. And so he sets out at the beginning of the book to prove to his family that he is a brujo and that he can still perform magic. And when doing a ceremony, he summons a ghost. But the interesting thing is he summons the ghost as someone who is still alive. So this one also has a little bit of a mystery to it because he summons the ghost of the bad boy in town, and they have to figure out, okay, what happens to him because, you know, he summoned a ghost. So eventually, you know, probably going to die, right? So this one is a kind of an urban fantasy, I would say. Um, it has some romantic elements to it, which is great. Love that in a book. But this is a really, really good one. It's another Own Voices, so it's one to really check out and recommend. I've only heard amazing things. I still have not read this one because I'm saving it, but it only has rave reviews. Another one that I have read and absolutely recommend is I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver. This is another Own Voices, which is great. Mason Deaver is non-binary, and the protagonist in this book is also non-binary. And so this book follows Ben, who comes out to their parents, and unfortunately their parents are not supportive. And so instead they go to live with their sister. And so this one is definitely more of a coming out story, and there's also a little bit of a romance in it. So this one focuses a little bit more on Ben getting used to their new school and going to therapy and kind of figuring themselves out. But it's also a really important story to tell. And it's also one of the first books that I can think of off the top of my head where the author is non-binary and the protagonist is non-binary. This one is very hopeful. So while it does deal with some more intense themes, and it deals with some upsetting themes, it ultimately is very heartwarming, and it is very affirming for trans kiddos and trans adults, because I read it and I really loved it and thought it was beautiful. So it's one of those books that, depending on where the kiddo is at their stage in life, or even the adult, if you're recommending YA books to adults, you might want to keep in mind the family relationships, because that can be triggering. But ultimately, Ben's relationship with our sister is really wonderful. And this is like with Felix Ever After, this is a really, really good book to recommend to siblings of trans kiddos if they're wanting to maybe understand them a little bit better, or know how to speak with them and validate their pronouns and how they identify and things like that. Because Ben's relationship with our sister is really, really lovely, and it's a good family relationship to point out within just any YA books, really, but especially for trans teens reading books, or even just trans adults who want to read YA books, or just, you know, humans in general who want to read a heartwarming book. All right. For adult recommendations, our third hot tip is don't just stick to nonfiction. It's really easy to recommend only nonfiction, but adults want to see themselves reflected in stories as well. Like, we want to go on adventures, we want to go on space stations, and like fly on the back of a dragon and fight bad guys and be superheroes as well. The amount of books that are available for adults aren't quite as diverse, I would say, as YA, just because We Need Diverse Books has been really excellent about increasing the amount of diversity within young adult books. And we don't quite see that as exuberantly in adult fiction, though it is changing. So keep that in mind when you're recommending books. You don't just have to stick to nonfiction. That being said, I have two nonfiction books to recommend. Look at me, not sticking to my hot tip. Okay, so
Oh no, they have frozen.
um,
Okay, I think you're
it's
unfrozen now.
oh, oops, sorry, technical difficulties. It's a classic. It's one that is a really, really, really good starter if you're going to read any book about the trans experience as an adult. Read this one. Janet Mock is she works on television shows. She is a writer. She has written for magazines. She's had a really colorful career. And this is her first memoir about how she kind of dealt with her gender identity growing up in Hawaii, being perceived as someone she was not, and how she kind of grappled with that emotionally, and later on, how she was able to transition. And so this one can be, because it is a memoir, it can be upsetting at times, but it's also really, really, really just perfectly written in regards to explaining certain topics or terms that are related to trans experiences. So she did an excellent job at explaining things. And so it's also an educational piece, which is why I would say, like, if you're going to start anywhere, start here. This is just an amazing book. She also narrated the audiobook herself. So if you like audiobooks, the audiobook is exquisite. It's one I highly, highly, highly recommend. And she is just a lovely human. And if I can promote her books more, I will. Um, Another author that we have here is Maya Kobabe, who does use neopronouns. So that's why it's important to keep in mind neopronouns. So E is, I believe they identify as non-binary, and they use neopronouns. And genderqueer is their coming of age story, uh, from when E was a small child to growing up, and just like experiences along the way. And it's also, I don't know if I said this already, a graphic novel. So it's a little bit more of a palatable experience, because you have the images to correlate with the text and stuff. And so it's an easier way, or perhaps a more colorful way, to understand a little bit more about this experience. And this is one that I think I've read within the past year, and would highly recommend if you need somewhere to start in regards to non-binary identities, gender fluid, gender queer, just anything that doesn't quite, any identities that don't fit within the binary. This is a really, really good one to check out and recommend.
All right, so I also have one nonfiction, but one of them is fiction. So I promise we're trying a little bit. It's trickier with adult books. So one of my favorites, and it is a really, really fast read. It's like the book is like maybe it's like this big and like that thick, is I'm Afraid of Men by Vivek Shraya. Um, she is an artist, she's a singer, who like does a lot of activism stuff in Canada. And this is just her talking about how she discovered she was trans, about her relationship with femininity and masculinity, and about her relationship with men, and the men in her life were men who scare her, or why like masculinity can be scary, or people can be intimidating. And it's just, there are lines in it that are just extremely heartbreaking, but it's because you also like can deeply empathize with them. But it's an excellent book. And as on the the blurb on the cover by Tegan and Sarah, it says essential reading for everyone. So this is more of a, not necessarily super narrative. It's more like a collection of interconnected essay chapters. But if you ever needed like, if you're like, oh, I want to reach my reading goal at the end of the year and I need something I can read quick, amazing, really deep, really like pivotal, but also a really quick read. Speaking of other quick reads, oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's also important to point out she also does write fiction.
Yes, she does write fiction.
So just if you find an author that you really enjoy, or that you'd like to recommend, and you're like, this is too much nonfiction, Kimberly and Margot told me not to do this, look into their backlog and see what else they have, or what else they are publishing in the future, because you never know. But her book, I've read her fiction book, and it's quite good. It's a really good examination of modern femininity and female relationships. And so it's a really interesting one, really good literary fiction to check out.
She also has a children's book called The Boy and the Bindi, because her family is from India, and so she also has a different like relationship with gender and gender expression, and because of it. But that one's excellent if you're looking for a good kids book that's also not an exploration of gender that isn't just white kids. So that one's also fantastic. My last recommendation is Upright Women Wanted by Sarah Gailey. So this is about a group of anti-fascist librarians in a post-apocalyptic world who ferry queer folks to safe places while also passing out um, sort of anti-fascist material to people who live in these little settlements. And it's about a woman whose girlfriend was killed for having those materials. So she sort of stows away in the back of the librarian's cart in order to get away from where she was that was dangerous. But one of the characters is non-binary and does an excellent job of trying to, it's really good, does a good job of like navigating being it trans and non-binary in a world where you cannot be out in certain places because it is dangerous. So it's a cool Western post-apocalyptic sci-fi-ish kind of romp while also having some more realistic lessons that you could take from it. Um, and just anything I've read by Sarah Gailey, I've loved. I haven't read all of their stuff, but this and Magic for Liars are phenomenal.
And even though we went against our own hot tip, that's partially because some of the authors and books that we would recommend, we already recommended it before in the Harry Potter section. So River Solomon, that's a good place to start. Akweke Emezi, Kason Calendar. There's all kinds of adult authors out there as well. We just have already recommended many, and we thought these ones were important to also share.
So at the end of the day, why is this important? Why are all of these little tips and tricks and information important? In order to make sure that trans people are not like we're not delicate flowers in need of coddling, but it's also we live in a world that was very much not built for us. It's not built for our comfort. It is certainly not built for our safety. And libraries should be a place for everyone. So this is just making sure that libraries can be a place for everyone. Um, sorry, let me move that. So every patron, no matter their age or gender expression, deserves respect, and they deserve to have a place at the library.
And I think it's a really, if you don't work in a library and maybe you are unfamiliar with the type of, with the many hats that librarians juggle within libraries, they might just be like, well, it's just books. What's the big deal about books? Um, but the magical thing about books is that when you find yourself represented within a book, it is such a rewarding experience as a reader. And I think most readers or many readers have had that experience where maybe they are not used to seeing themselves and they find themselves, or just they connect with a character or an author in such a way that is really validating and empowering. And so as librarians, we basically have the key to magic, and to helping a patron who maybe they're not super respected at home, but if they go into a library and they know they are safe and they know they will be recommended all kinds of stories for them to enjoy and maybe see themselves within the pages, that's really wonderful. That's basically like a really cool gift that we can share with patrons, because that's one of the great things about libraries. Like, it's not just like having someone check out a book. There are a lot of things behind that. Modern libraries are really just paving the way for social interactions in general, and that's something I think that we should be mindful of and also proud of. So yeah, I think it's really important that trans patrons, trans staff members, trans folks in general have a place in libraries, and it's our job to make sure that they feel safe within that place.
So just to add, let me scooch this again. Here's our contact information if you'd like to get in touch with us. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, want to talk about a book that we might have recommended that you liked, or if you have any book recommendations for us, we would love to hear from all of you. If you found this helpful, if there's anything about this, just we like to hear from people. We are, I would like to think very we're people-y.
But yeah, feel free to reach out, or if you have questions, if you're like, oh, well, I read this book, but the author's not trans, but there are trans characters, I'm confused. Yeah, I feel free to reach out. That can be something as well. It's a little bit difficult sometimes to find proper representation, or at least own voices representation. So navigating that in regards to recommending books can be tricky sometimes, but that's why we are here to help.
Yes. So if you ever want any sort of advice or help with recommending trans books, give us a digital email ring. Not like a ring, like a okay. Anyway, thank you all so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed our presentation.